Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to yet another video from the Draw Step. And today we have, believe it or not, yet another strong, I wouldn't say this deck is toxic necessarily, but it is very combo heavy, so it will guarantee you quite a few wins. Now, the commander that I'm using for this deck is more of a toolbox commander, I would say, than a deck that's solely built around the commander. A lot of the decks that I have put on the channel so far, the commander's really been the key pin, the cog that has really made the entire deck run. With this deck, the commander is reasonably strong, and there are synergies built into this deck to feed into his ability. But for the most part, the combos that we're accomplishing, the things that we're going to be doing, have less to do with the commander and more to do with just the color identity of our commander. Let's get into it. Alright, so the commander that we're using, and I am going to butcher this name, but it is Slogurk the Overslime. Here is what that looks like, at least the art that I have. And it's a 3 mana in Simic. It's a 3/3 with trample, and it says whenever a land card is put in your graveyard from anywhere, put a 1/1 counter on Slogurk the Overslime, remove 3 1/1 counters from it, and return it to your hand. When it leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So, that in and of itself is pretty strong right there, because you are going to be very... with this deck, you're going to be able to put quite a few land cards into your graveyard. Just off the top, some good examples would be Myriad Landscape. Enters the battlefield, you sack it, goes into your graveyard, makes your commander stronger. Remote Isle and Slippery Karst, they are two of the same as far as they have a cycling ability. So again, your commander just says enters the battlefield or goes into your graveyard from anywhere. It doesn't have to be on the battlefield and going to your graveyard. So that cycling ability is putting a land card into the graveyard, so you're triggering it and you're putting a 1/1 counter on it. And then Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, these are two more examples of crack or fetch lands to be triggering his ability and still getting a land card out of it. So those are some of the ways that we can work around our commander. Another good example would be Perennial Behemoth, Conduit of Worlds, and last but not least, Crucible of Worlds. All three of these do the same thing in just slightly different ways, but they basically say you may play land cards from your graveyard. So again, those lands that we just went over are even stronger now, because we can lay them, sack them, send them to our graveyard, buff up our commander, bring them back on the next turn, and keep doing that process over and over, giving this our Ooze commander just a giant beefy boy with that trample to take out our opponents. Now the one I do want to note, Conduit of Worlds, it has a tap ability where it's tap, choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn, activate only as a sorcery. So, you can only do this on your turn, but that gives you some pretty strong value as far as recursion of other cards that end up in your graveyard that you can use. There's quite a few cards that will end up in our graveyard as this game goes on, so that's a pretty strong ability right there. So those are some of the pieces as far as our commander itself goes, of working with him to make him stronger, be able to attack our opponents. That is great. Here are, getting these out of the way, these are the basic lands that we're using. A lot of green and blue, I believe 10 of each. And you'll be able to find this entire deck list in the description below. As far as non-basic lands go, you can really use any, but these are the non-basics that I used. Again, mostly just mana fixing, whatever you need to do there, but there are also some good benefits with some of these cards as well too. Now, we're going to kind of get into the combos. This is what, again, this deck is really built around. These combos that can just win you the game extremely quickly. The first one up is a 3-card combo using Hedron Crab, Head Shredder, and then the classic Thassa's Oracle. So how it works is with Hedron Crab on the battlefield, really you could have all 3 of these on the, well, except for the Thassa's Oracle. You don't want to have that on the battlefield yet. But Hedron Crab, when a land enters the battlefield under your control, target player puts the top 3 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. And Head Shredder, whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from the library, put them onto the battlefield tapped. So what this is doing is you're basically self-milling yourself out. With the amount of lands in this deck, you're probably 1 out of 3. You have a pretty good chance of hitting a land every time you do that. So when you mill those cards, any land cards that you just milled out will, because of Head Shredder, go to the battlefield. The land triggers the landfall ability, keeps that cycle going. Ideally, you'll be able to mill yourself out, lay your Thassa's Oracle, and win the game. So there is that approach. Another one, and this one's a little janky, but it costs in total, it's pretty expensive, but you can do it in steps. The first part to get down is Biovisionary. It's 3 mana in Simic, and at the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures named Biovisionary, you win the game. Now, in Commander, it's a singleton format. You normally only have 1 copy in a deck, but we have Rite of Replication. It costs 4 mana by itself, but there is a kicker for 5 more mana, so 9 mana in total. It says create a token that's a copy of target creature. If this spell was kicked, create 5 of those tokens instead. Short of a Counterspell, this is going to be very hard for your opponents to interact with, because again, all you need is that Biovisionary on the table. You lay Rite of Replication, and right before your end step, you create 5 token copies of it. You now have 5 Biovisionaries on the battlefield. You go to your end step, you win the game automatically. So that is a fun, solid combo right there. Another combo we have in the deck, and this takes about 12 mana to operate. So again, it is a little expensive, but you're in green. You are going to be doing so much ramping throughout here, you are not going to have a problem getting to the 12 mana to pull this off. But it's 6 to lay, Mindslaver. And then 4 to tap, sacrifice Mindslaver. You control target player during that player's next turn. Then, one of our lands, we have Academy Ruins for 2 mana, tap, put target artifact on top of your library. So with this, you are basically, you're laying it, you're sacrificing the Mindslaver, gaining control of your opponent, and then with Academy Ruins, you're just putting that right back on top of your library. You can do it all over again, depending on how many opponents you're playing against. Like if you have other ways to draw back into this, you can keep doing it over and over again, and basically turn a game of Commander into a game of Solitaire. Your friends aren't going to love it, but it is very powerful and pretty toxic. The next combo we're working with, this one is pretty janky. It's a 3-card combo, but I have some extra ways of going about it. The first card, and the most important card that you're going to need for it, is Food Chain. So with Food Chain, it's 3 mana to lay. It says exile a creature you control, add X mana of any one color, where X is 1 plus the exiled creature's mana value. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells. So there's 2 rather strange cards out there. There's actually a few. Another example would be Squee the Immortal that you can cast from exile. Unfortunately, Squee is red, so it wouldn't fit in this deck. However, we have Misthollow Griffin for 4 mana, has flying, and it says you may cast Misthollow Griffin from exile. So with that and Food Chain on the battlefield, you can exile Misthollow Griffin, and it's 4 mana, plus the extra 1, so you've now got 5 mana. Use 4 of it to cast Mist Hollow from exile, bring it back to the battlefield, and do this over and over and over again, each time netting yourself 1 mana. Then the other creature that we have in this deck that can do it is Eternal Scourge, not the duck. Eternal Scourge for 3 mana. And it also says you may cast Eternal Scourge from, keep doing it, Eternal Scourge from exile. So, there's bugs. Get them out of here. All right. So again, same thing, except it's just a little bit less mana each time. 3 to cast it, you exile it, you get 4, you use 3 of it, net yourself 1 mana. So that's a way to get infinite mana, and if you can't win the game with infinite mana in and of itself, well then you have a problem. However, the other part of this combo is Aetherflux Reservoir. Each time you are doing this cycle, you are casting a creature spell, and Aetherflux Reservoir says whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. Pay 50 life, it deals 50 damage to any target. So even if you don't want to use your infinite mana to do ridiculous broken things, you can just keep on looping this, say 150 times, so you have 150 life, deal out 50 damage to your 3 other opponents, you win the game. GG's. And our last combo, and this one is actually, there's multiple different ways to do it. So there are a few key pieces that we need. The first is Elvish Reclaimer. Now this one is not necessarily a combo piece for this, but it'll help set up your combo. Because it says Elvish Reclaimer gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more land cards in your graveyard, which there probably will be. Cool. Great. Not what we're worried about. Pay 2, tap, sacrifice a land, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Now, note what it says there. It says a land card. It does not specify a basic land card. So what that gives us the ability to do is go get Simic Growth Chamber. Now, Simic Growth Chamber, if you're not familiar with it, taps for the green-blue. And when it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand. Now again, the wording is very important because it says return a land you control, which means you can return this land to your hand. Now how does that help us? The other part of the combo that we're going to be using is Kodama of the East Tree. And it says, whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser converted mana cost from your hand onto the battlefield. A land has 0 mana cost. So what you can do is you have Kodama of the East Tree in play. You lay this land. When it enters the battlefield, it tells you have to return a land. You return this land to your hand, and that has triggered Kodama's ability, which allows you to put a permanent card with equal or less mana value from your hand onto the battlefield. You then get to lay your Simic Growth Chamber again, and you can loop this over and over and over, and there's really nothing that stops it. I mean, there's a few things your opponents can do to stop this interaction, but typically, once you get this bad boy going, there's not much they can do to end it. Now, what good does that do us? So, that's where these 3 cards come into play. First one, Rampaging Boloths. It has Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. Truly, any card that has Landfall is going to combo with this, because we bring this land to the battlefield 100 times. Well, now we have 100 4/4 green beast creature tokens. Another one that can combo with it is Scoot Swarm. Scoot Swarm? Scoot Swarm? I don't know how to pronounce it. I give up. 3 mana, landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm. If you already have 6 lands on the battlefield and you start doing this, this is going to get insane so quickly. You will be creating so many copies of it, which will be creating so many more copies of it, and you are soon going to have a massive army of 1/1s that your opponents won't be able to do anything about. The last one, and this is probably one of the strongest because, again, it's getting you infinite mana, is going to be Tireless Provisioner, Landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. Yeah, we are going to be creating a lot of treasure tokens. This is so busted. This is, again, a way to get infinite mana. You keep looping that. It keeps triggering the landfall. You keep getting treasure tokens. You use those treasure tokens to win the game. So there is probably a good 6 or 7 different ways in this deck outside of not even touching your commander. You don't even have to have your commander on the battlefield, but you have so many different ways to win the game in alternate routes. And that personally is something I really enjoy. Commander damage is great. Building a deck around your commander is great. But why do that when you can find other faster ways to win the game? Now, we'll get into the rest of the deck, and these are the cards that can help with the gameplay of whether it be getting to your combo pieces or if you are working with your commander, however you want to go about it. First, make sure your opponents can't touch you or your plan. Negate, counter target non-creature spell. Counterspell, it counterspells. Offer, you can't refuse. Counter target non-creature spell. Get out. Now this one can either target a creature or enchantment spell or return 1 or 2 target creatures and or enchantments you own to your hand. So it can be either a bounce spell or a counter spell. Refute, counter target spell, draw a card, then discard a card. And last but not least, keep safe, counter target spell, targets a permanent you control, and draw a card. A lot of times your opponents are going to be, trying to destroy some of your combo pieces, so you're going to want to have that to keep all of your stuff safe. All right, moving right along, we have Spelunking. It's 3 mana, says a lot of different things about lands entering the battlefield. The most important part is right there at the bottom. Lands you control enter the battlefield untapped. Palazzo Archers, we don't have a ton of flying. We have a little bit of reach in this deck. We want to be able to protect ourselves if our opponents have a flying deck trying to attack us with flying. So that's where this comes in nice. Whenever a creature with flying attacks you or a planeswalker you control, Palazzo Archers deals damage equal to its power to that creature. So from a base standpoint, it's doing 2 damage to that creature, which is, depending on how big the flyers your opponents have, that's pretty strong. But if you have a way to put 1/1 counters on this, double its power, that sort of thing, that's going to just wipe any flying creatures your opponents send at you. Patchwork Bestie. 1 mana for a 3/3, and it has Delirium. Patchwork Bestie can't attack or block unless there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. We're going to be sending a lot of cards to our graveyard if we are interacting with our commander or even just throughout the rest of the gameplay. So it's going to be pretty easy to get those 4 card types into our graveyard and be able to attack and block with it. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill a card. Now again, this one does work well with our commander because we're wanting to get land cards into our graveyard to make him a stronger beastie boy. Thunderfoot Baloth. Baloth. Yeah, there we go. That feels right. 6 mana for a 5/5 with trample, and as long as you control your commander, Thunderfoot Baloth gets +2/+2, so it's now a 7/7 with trample. And other creatures you control get +2/+2 and have trample. So again, all of those, going back to some of the combos we had, creating all those 4/4s, or the 1/1 Scroot Swarms, whatever. Now those are buffed by 2 and have trample. We'll be able to run over our opponents. They don't stand a chance. Collective Resistance, it's 2 mana, but you can escalate it to choose 1 or more. Destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or target creature gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So, very flexible. If we need to destroy stuff or if we need to keep our commander or a combo piece safe, we have the ability to do that with that card. Growth Spiral, draw a card. You can put a land card onto the battlefield. Ramp plus card draw. What's not to love? Opt. Scry 1, draw a card. Classic. Sakura Tribe Elder, Steve, as they say, enters the battlefield. Not when it enters the battlefield. You lay it, you sack it, you get a land card. Cool, help you ramp. Tatavoya Tyova, there we go, Benthic Druid, has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So again, this is a way, going back to that little landfall cycle we had going on one of the combos, you could also use this one, because again, with that landfall trigger, it says you gain a life and draw a card. If you have an Aether Flux Reservoir with all that life that you're gaining, you can then use that to take out an opponent. So there's another alternate win con right there. Icy Tyrant of Gyre Strait. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. That in and of itself is a strong ability. And it also says whenever a land you control enters, you may draw a card. The may part is certainly nice, so you don't accidentally mill yourself out with all your lands entering the battlefield. And then Invigorating Surge. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, then double the number of 1/1 counters on that creature. So again, your commander is probably going to have a lot of 1/1 counters on it. You can lay this, double the amount of 1/1 counters on it. If you already have 4 or 5 on there, now you have 10 on there. It's a 13/13 with trample. That's going to be hard for your opponents to stop. Splendid Reclamation. For 4 mana, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is great. This is with all of the milling and our sack lands that are going to the graveyard, now we can just bring them right back to the battlefield. Bonnie Paul Clearcutter. Definitely not a play on Paul Bunyan. There is no shot. Wizards of the Coast was not trying to rip that one off. But for 6 mana, you get a 6/5 with reach. And when it enters the battlefield, create Boo. Legendary blue ox creature token. With this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. And whenever you attack, draw a card. Then you may put a land from your hand on your from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. So again, bringing back some of those lands from either the graveyard or your hand, making your ox even stronger. That is a solid piece right there. We have next up Lazotep Planting for 2 mana, amass 1. So it orcs, cool, or makes a zombie army, I guess. I was thinking of whatever the one from the Lord of the Rings was. Feels similar. But anyway, for 2 mana, it gives you and permanents you control hexproof until end of turn. Just more protection to keep your opponents from messing up what you got going on. Break Down the Door for 3 mana, choose 1. Exile target artifact, exile target enchantment, or Manifest Dread. Could be a way to get some cards into your graveyard, or exile obnoxious piece that one of your opponents has on the battlefield. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, and non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. So with all of those creatures we're creating, well, I guess not really, because it is non-tokens, but the other creatures that we have in here are going to make this even stronger. So this could become a very, very large creature. Otherworldly Gaze for 1 mana. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put any number of them into your graveyard and the rest back on top of your library in any order, and then you can flash back for 2. So this is a nice way, again, kind of set up your library or drop some lands into your graveyard. Make your commander even stronger. Augur of Autumn for 3 mana. You may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may play lands from the top of your library. This is just ridiculous. So now, with some of the pieces we have in play, we can play lands from our hand. We can play lands from our graveyard. We can now play lands from the top of our library. We can play lands just about anywhere we want. We are going to be able to ramp so quickly. We will be able to afford really anything that we want to do. Our opponents do not stand a chance against this. But on top of it, it says as long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, which we'll pretty easily be able to do, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. This is, again, giving us even more value, being able to see and with some of our cards manipulate the top of our deck to get into play the stuff that we want. Formless Genesis, 3 mana, Changeling, it's a sorcery, but you get to create an XX colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling, and Death Touch, where X the number of land cards in your graveyard. Like I said, we'll be milling and putting a lot of land cards into our graveyard, so this can become quite large, and it does have Retrace, which is going to put more cards into our graveyard and allow us to get an even bigger creature throughout the game. Snakeskin Veil, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn. Nice way to protect our commander or another card that we care about. Rampant Growth, a solid ramp piece right there. Reset, cast a spell only during an opponent's turn after their upkeep step, but it allows you to untap all the lands that you control. Very nice. Amphibian Downpour for 3 mana. It has Flash and Storm. When you cast a spell, copy it. For each spell cast before it this turn, you may choose new targets. For those copies, copies become tokens. It's an enchant creature. An enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a blue frog creature with base power and toughness 1/1. Even on its own, even just by itself, for 3 mana, you can turn somebody's commander into a 1/1 with no ability, so you can shut down an opponent's deck. But if you've cast other spells during your turn, and it does have Flash, so it could be casting other spells during an opponent's turn, whatever that may look like, you could turn a bunch of their big scary stuff, or multiple of your opponent's big scary stuff, into nothing more than 1/1 little frogs. Mind Sculpt, 2 mana, target opponent puts his top 7 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. This is, for the most part, most of the time, this is just going to be self-mill. You're just going to lay this, and you're going to mill 7 cards into your graveyard, and hopefully you'll get a bunch of lands in there, make your commander even stronger. Trigon Predator, 3 mana. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment that player controls. It's a 2/3 with flying, so again, a little protection from flying, and that's a pretty nice payoff for doing combat damage. Augmenter Pugilist? I don't know. 3 mana for a 3/3. It has trample, and as long as you control 8 or more lands, it gets +5/+5. So very quickly, you can get this out, and with all the ramping we're going to do, it's going to turn into an 8/8 with trample. Very nice indeed. Life from the Loam. 2 mana, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand, and then you can dredge 3. If you draw a card, instead you may put exactly 3 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. So again, this is just a repeatable way to return those land cards that we're sending to our graveyard back, to your hand to be able to either relay or, send to our graveyard in different ways. So a nice repeatable effect there. Wilderness Reclamation for 4 mana. It's an enchantment at the beginning of your end step. Untap all lands you control so you can then have that mana free to be able to do stuff on your opponent's turn. Multani, Yaviyama's Avatar. They really need to make these cards easier to pronounce. I'm struggling over here. It has Reach and Trample, and it gets +1/+1 for each land you control and each land card in your graveyard. So with everything on the battlefield and everything in the graveyard, this is going to become a very big creature for us. It can block that flying, it has that trample, so it can be strong on offense or defense, and you can pay 2, return 2 lands you control to their owner's hand, and then return it from your graveyard to your hand. So even if they do take care of this card, you can still bring it back again. Beast Within, classic, 3 mana, destroy target permanent, they get a 3/3, or you can get a 3/3 if you want to destroy something of your own, like, say, a land to make your commander stronger. Shriekwood Devourer, 7 mana, it's a 7/5 with trample. Whenever you attack with 1 or more creatures, untap up to X lands where X is a greatest power among those creatures. So even with this, even when you attack with this 7/5, you're now untapping 7 lands. And that could be if you're attacking with your commander, if you've gotten that really boosted up, you could untap all of your lands. Very strong piece right there. Sheltering Word, 2 mana, target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. You gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Again, a very nice protection spell right there, and gain yourself some life along the way, because why not? Aether Tunnel, 2 mana, enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and can't be blocked. That would be nice to put on your commander. So again, doing more damage, that commander damage, take out your opponents very quickly. 4 mana for Ricksmith's Slumbering Isle. It's a 12/12 that enters with slumber counters on it. When you cast spells, you take them out, and then you'll get a 12/12 creature, but in the meantime, it's a land and can tap for green-blue. Cultivate, again, another classic ramp piece for you right there. Tyvar the Pummeler, this can be a nice finishing piece. It's a 3 mana for a 3/3. Tap another untapped creature you control, type out of the Pummeler games indestructible until end of turn, tap it. And then 5 mana. Creatures you control get +X until end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. If your commander is huge, you pay that 5 mana, and now all of your creatures are huge. Swing through, take out your opponent. Thought Courier, 2 mana, draw a card, then discard a card from your hand. This is a great way to dig into those combo pieces that we're looking at or looking for, and also discard lands into our graveyard, make your commander even stronger. Elysian Caryatid. I think the more that I've done this, the more I've realized that I really stink at pronouncing things. Anyway, 2 mana, tap, add 1 mana of any one color. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, add 2 mana of any one color instead. So a 2 mana dork, not great, but really not that bad. Plus, once you get your commander out, all you need to do is get 1 more power on it, and now it's tapping for 2 mana, which is a pretty good deal right there. Soul Ring. I feel like every deck should have a Soul Ring. Great ramp piece. And then last but not least, again, this can be a giant game finisher. Overwhelming Stampede. 5 mana until end of turn. Creatures you control gain trample and get +X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You got that big commander, you swing through, you do a lot of damage. So, again, like I said, this is there's a lot of different ways you can go with this deck. You can just destroy your opponents with your really big commander. You can make a giant army, or you can just combo. And it's not just 1 or 2 combos, so not every time you play this, it's not going to always play out the same. You have so many different ways, and that's one of my biggest frustration with combo decks, is that they typically just have one way that they play out every time. You just look for that one combo, you win the game, cool. This allows you to play this deck over and over again and still have diversity in how it plays out and how you beat your opponents. But the important part is you're going to beat your opponents a lot of times. So, that being said, if there's any changes you would make to this deck, other combos in Simic that you would add to it, or what you would do differently with it, let me know. If you have any commanders that you want me to review or build a deck around, drop those in the comments below. I will, make some pretty strong toxic decks with them. That being said, like, subscribe, and there will be another very, very strong and nasty deck build that you're going to see pop up on the screen. Go ahead and watch that, and I'll see y'all next time.